Hello, my name is Bob, and this is a video on how to use Google Flights that I'm making specifically for family and friends, and more specific to a good friend of mine, Rosemary Owens, who recently retired and said, Bob, you know how to fly real well and get those good flights, so please show me how. So I'm making this video for Rosemary. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Google Flights is a tool that allows you to basically find the flights you need to get you where you're going, and does it in a really efficient manner. Back before the 2000s, you didn't have the World Wide Web really to use to do that, and you had to like call a travel agent or call the airline to have them help you book a flight. You know, right around 2000, you started seeing sites like Expedia, Travelocity, and Orbitz come up. And these were really convenient because they were basically travel agents online. And then instead of having to call one up and have them do all the research for you, you could kind of look at it and do it yourself. It might take you a while, and sometimes you had to go through a lot of different, flights to find what you want, but you were able to do that. And in some cases, you get a better deal than if you would just call the airline itself to do it because they've made deals with those companies. The only real downfall to it is that if you have to make changes down the road, due to your plans changing, you had to call the travel agency to do it, and you could not call the airline because you booked it through a travel agent. This is where Google Flights comes in. Google Flights gives you all the power you need to find the flight you need and has some really cool advanced tools to do that. And it lets you then go and pick those flights and then go directly to the airline site and book it. Okay, so now you're dealing only with the airline. And just like the travel agencies, sometimes you'll find that if you go through Google Flights to pick your different flights and then get it all set up, and then go to the airline site, you actually get a better price than if you would have, looked on the airline's, own website to look up those same exact flights. Believe me, this has happened, and I've taken advantage of that. Now, experienced flyers know all about this tool, and so this is really not a new thing for them. But it's for people who don't fly a lot and maybe only do fly occasionally, but have not really looked and found what tool they could use besides going to the travel agency sites to do it. So why don't we go ahead and get started? The first thing you want to do is open your browser, use whatever search engine you have, type in Google Flights, and then you will find a link that will take you to it. So let's go ahead, and now once you're there, let's get to that page and take a look at the features on the page. First, how are you traveling? Round trip, one way, or multi-city? You got a drop down arrow for that. How many people are going? So you can see how many adults, how many children, and how many infants. And finally, what class of ticket do you wish to fly in? Economy, premium economy, business, or first. Do be aware that premium economy and business generally don't exist inside the states. When you're flying from state to state, you have economy and first class. Now, you have your departure city and where you're going to, and then a departure and return dates. Now, if you're traveling one way, you're only going to have a departure date because you're not returning. So let's go ahead and set up a flight to Dallas-Fort Worth, okay, which is in Texas. And then let's go ahead and click on our departure day. Let's say I wanted to go visit some family or friends in Texas and over the 4th of July weekend. I'll click on departure, and you notice we got a 2-month calendar that comes up. Now it shows flights in green and flights in gray, or prices, I should say. Okay, green indicates the best price you're going to get. It's not always exactly the flight you might want to take, but it is the best price you're going to get. In this case, if I wanted to go over the 4th of July holiday, I might decide to pick a Wednesday and then come back on a Sunday. So I click my dates, click done, and then do my search. And here I am at the page showing me all the different available flights. Now, Google tries to put the best flights up at the top here. Okay, your top departing flights. Now, in our case, DFW is the major American hub. And Alaska flies there a lot too. So from Portland, you're going to see a lot of nonstop flights going directly to DFW. Depending on where you live, that might not be the case, and you have to have a one-stop or a two-stop leg to get to it. Okay, and I'm going to cover some things that you want to know about that in just a second. Okay, if you scroll down, you notice we also got Spirit and Frontier. Notice these are one stoppers. Okay, so from Portland, it's pretty much it. And on a major hub like DFW, a lot of times you only have one stop. If you're going, farther, you're like overseas, especially, there's a good chance you're going to have two stops. So that's something to take account of. Now, one thing you need to be aware of when you are doing a flight that has a stop is your layover time. So you look at the layover time here. I'll make it a little bit more apparent. 5 hours, 17 minutes here in Vegas if you're on Frontier. Now, that's not, a little bit longer than you want, but it's not terribly long. But it's much better than a really short layover, because on a short layover, it's easy to miss your plane if anything goes wrong, especially if you've booked in economy and you're near the back of the plane, because it could take 20 minutes to get off that plane. Okay. And then, so if you have a really short layover time, that could really, give you a really short window to get to your gate. In this case, 5 hours, 17 minutes, plenty of time, even if your plane is late. And, guess what? In some parts of the country, storms and other things can cause your plane to leave, 30 minutes to an hour late. So that's something to be aware of. As we scroll down, you'll notice that some of these flights down here have 55 minutes or 48 minutes. Again, that is a really short time. Now, if you're familiar with flying to these places and you know how to get around the airport, maybe you can make that. I could make this one in Seattle because I fly from Portland and I know SeaTac really well. But if your plane's late, say 30 minutes, okay, now that 48, is 18. Okay, so now you got to get off the plane and get to your gate in 18 minutes. And if you're at the front in business class or near one of the very front, economy seats, you'll be off the plane in 10 minutes. Then you got about 8 minutes. Okay, you're probably not going to make it. Okay, so anything goes wrong and you're missed this flight. So probably not a flight I would take, because it's just too short of a time, and anything that goes wrong is going to make me miss my plane. Now, if you're flying overseas, this becomes very important, because it's not like, even if I miss this one, maybe I could catch a flight an hour later, something like that. Okay, but in the case of going overseas, that might not be the case. That might be the only plane of the day going to where you're going. And so now you're having to go to the next day. And then if you have other stops in between, and like maybe it's a two-stopper, well, now before you get to your destination, now they got to rebook that flight too. So it can cause a whole host of problems. When you're flying domestically, it's recommended that you have at least an hour and a half. Okay. If you have flying internationally, at least 3 hours on layover. Now, certain things will help you out, like if when you're getting to the airport, if you have TSA, the pre-approval, well, then you get to go through the short line and you don't have to strip down basically to go through security, which is really nice. Me and my wife have that. And if you're returning from overseas, if you have global entry, suddenly the big passport line instead of being a 20 to 40 minute experience, depending on how long the line is, going through the global entry line usually takes about 5 minutes. And it's that quick. So those kind of things can, give you a better window. And sometimes we come back from Colombia and we go through Miami, and believe me, it takes a half hour to get to the passport control alone, then get through. So having global entry and getting there and be able to get through in 5 minutes makes a big difference. But otherwise, remember, an hour and a half domestically, 3 hours internationally, especially if you've checked bags, because your bags got to get to your new airplane. And if you've got really short time, they might not make it. So something to remember. So as we scroll up, let's look at some other features. Okay, you notice that you got some things that you can filter by number of stops. There's nonstop, 1 or 2 or fewer. If you pick one of these options and you don't see any flights, that means that you got to go up to the next one, because there just aren't any flights with that many stops. The airlines. Now, airlines are, they have teams like One World, Sky Team, and Star Alliance. These are a group of airlines that team together. And so sometimes you might book a flight through, let's say American, but it might be that one of their team members, Alaska, flies there more frequently. And so, or has a bunch of flights going there too. And depending on when you want to leave, I might book on American and end up going on an Alaska flight or vice versa. And the farther you go, the more that might happen because maybe another team member serves a certain area more than the airline that you're booking on, especially overseas. So that's something to be aware of. You can filter out, you only pick one airline if you want, or you can do it by team. It all depends on what your situation is. Now, the rest of these up here, bags, price, times, not terribly important, for most people. So I'm not going to go into those. Another feature I'm going to show here, this is for people who fly more, and this is new. So even if you're an experienced flyer, and know how to use Google Flights, maybe you didn't notice this new feature by PointsPath that allows you to put a plugin into your Chrome browser that not only shows you the price, but how many miles you would need to spend to take the same flight. And it also tells you whether it's better to use cash because those miles aren't worth it compared to the cash price, or vice versa. Okay, so a really, really good thing. So whether you're experienced or, new flyer, if you do got miles, this is a really good little plugin. Now, it only works for about 5 major airlines unless you have a paid subscription, and then it expands it. But for most people, if you're flying Delta, United, American, this is a really great little tool. Now, here's where it gets really powerful. Notice you come down here, it says right now this is, a good time to purchase it, but the prices are typical. That means they're not higher, they're not lower than average. If you click the little down arrow, you can see that here's we are, but there's been times where it's been much lower or times it's been higher. Okay, so this kind of tells you that prices can fluctuate. This is why you want to, not book your flight, right away. A lot of times, what you want to do is a couple months out, start searching, because from day to day your prices can change. And today it might be a high day. Tomorrow you go and look up the same flight and you could save 10%. So spending a week or so, sometimes even a couple weeks waiting for that, to see how the prices change can be well worth it. If you don't want to get on Google Flights every day, what you could do is set up a track prices. Okay, you notice that I got a little thing here that helps track prices. Now, you can do it here, or you can do it when you found the flight you actually want, which is how I'm going to do it shortly. But basically, this allows you to get emails telling you price changes in the flights you've selected. So you can just sit back and watch your emails, and all of a sudden, when you see hey, it hits a price point that you're like, wow, I can't pass that up. That was 10-20% cheaper than when I looked a week ago. You jump on it and you book your flight. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, another thing to be aware of is your arrival time. Okay, 4:40 a.m. So this is a red eye. I don't mind taking red eyes, but it's usually because I want to catch another flight at that destination to somewhere else early in the morning, or if I'm staying, at a friend's house or going to visit somebody where I can go and visit them right after we, rent our car and get to where we're going, because hotels don't do check-ins until 2 p.m. So if you get in at 4:40 a.m., you just can't go check into your hotel unless you booked it for that day, the day before, really, or you got to make an arrangement and possibly pay a fee. Many hotels have bag storage service, so you could go there, drop your bags off, and go and do things until your check-in time came. But it's something you need to be aware of. We tend to, if we're going to be checking into a hotel in that area, we prefer not to arrive until around noon, because then by the time you get off and get your bags and get your rent-a-car and get you where you're going, it's close to 2. Maybe you go eat lunch somewhere, and then it is 2, and you can check in without penalty. So in this case, we would probably pick, if we were going to stay at a hotel in Dallas, we would pick the 7:45 because it gets us there at 1:30. Let's go ahead and pick that. Now you notice that it takes us to the next screen where you got returning flights. You notice a little pop-up here. And this is all about using PointsPath. So again, it's a really good feature. You can, it goes by airport code, not city name, because sometimes there are multiple airports in the city. Like in Dallas, there's Dallas Fort DFW, and there's also Love Field, which Alaska flies into, and Southwest Airlines does also. So that's something to remember. Now, in this case, it depends on when do I want to get home. Okay, if it's a Sunday and I got to work on Monday, well, 9:23, pretty late. By the time I get off the plane and get home, it's probably 11 before I'm going to bed. This is a little bit better deal. Okay, getting home by 7. If I want to get home earlier in the day so I have time to do stuff, I would probably come down here and pick this flight down here. But notice I could also fly on American and come back on Alaska, but it says separate ticket, so I'm booking two separate airlines. It's just not a big deal necessarily, just something you have to remember. But in this case, and if the price is good enough, maybe I'll do it. Here's a big difference here. You're talking $50. But I would earn a little bit more miles on American, even though I could earn American miles flying Alaska. I would earn a few more miles by doing it on American itself. So I would probably pick this particular flight right here. So we go ahead and we pick it. Now we're at the screen. It shows the flights we want. Okay, that we're gonna take, and then down here it gives you options. Now, basic economy, you don't get to pick your seat. There's no priority boarding. No ticket changes. So that's something you got to be aware of. If you're certain you're taking this flight, well, then go for it. And if that's the price you want, otherwise, you're going to see things like this. In this case, at $90, you get a free seat selection, and you can change your flight even though there might be a fee, and you get a free carry-on too. So as you go up, you get more options, but they do charge you more. So it all depends on what you feel is important to pick the one you want. Now, also notice that you could right here say book it with miles instead. Again, this is a really cool option because of the points path plugin. It knows how many miles it would take. So instead of paying $343 or even the main cabin, again, this same section, booking with miles, is it's gonna be the same mile. So sometimes using this, using miles over this price to get main cabin or main plus would be a better deal. Okay, and I might pick that. In this case, I would just say, hey, I think I want to fly main cabin. You click continue. Takes a few seconds, but now, boom, here I am. I'm at American site. Again, I'm booking on the site itself. Okay, so if there are changes in my plans, I can call the airline to deal with it, and I don't have to go through like Expedia or Orbitz or, other agencies like that, which is very convenient. Okay, because otherwise, you're having to have a third party, take care of all those things for you. But this is Google Flights. Whether you're, brand new or experienced, is a great tool. In fact, all experienced flyers know about this, and they use this all the time. The Points Path plugin is a new feature that maybe some experienced flyers don't know about, but they're probably going to want to start using, because if you fly a lot, you're probably earning miles. Okay. Now, I also have other videos that will show you all about earning miles, whether they be on American, United, or points with cards that aren't specific to airlines like Chase or American Express, because you can transfer those miles to points to airlines, and use those to fly also. I also have a video called CPM, cents per mile, that tells you how to evaluate whether or not that's a good deal or not. So a lot of things going on here. Just, if you don't have miles, this is the perfect tool that helps you pick your flight, pick the one you want, see the relevant factors. Okay, don't forget things like layovers are important. You don't want way too long of a layover, like 10 or 12 hours if you can avoid it, but you don't want one that's too short either, because you might miss your plane. Okay. Google Flights lets you do all sorts of, filters to, deal with this. And then you can find the flight you want, pick it, and then book it right on their site. Okay. And with the new Points Path plugin, it also lets you decide whether or not you want to use miles and go right from there. So it's a great tool. I recommend you use it. Okay. This is the way to travel now, is use Google Flights to find the flights you want and then book it directly on the website. There are a few advantages sometimes to using the travel agencies like Expedia or those others. If you don't want to have to deal with stuff, you can book your hotel and cars and all that. And sometimes you get package deals, but that's a totally different, situation. If you just want to get a flight and get to where you're going and get back, this is the way to do it. Anyway, hope this was informational and helped you find a better flight. and have a nice day.